aren't there a lot of people who just want a crappy, cheap car? So if they can get an electric cheap car, even if it doesn't have like super features, that will be sufficient. That's kind of one question. The second question would be, BYD, I agree, has really low margins, but they probably will operate with really low margins. So I kind of think it like maybe the flip side. If they don't have to make much of a profit, they could maybe sell a lot more cars. Tesla is going to make a lot of profit, and they have to. But BYD is, if they're going to be like China's basically their lead seller of EVs and protected by the Chinese government, then they might be able to sell, very low margins. They don't have to, focus as much on they obviously have shareholders, but it's kind of a different mindset and a different background. So I'm wondering if there are some Chinese companies that eventually can compete. Now, consistent with what you just said, I think I saw on Twitter yesterday, the CEO of BYD, he was asked something along the lines of, are you competing with Tesla? And the answer was what basically Elon said, no, we're kind of competing with ICE vehicles. So I think they have the same view that the market's big enough for everybody, and until you saturate the market, the more the merrier. Let's kind of make the switch. But I wonder ultimately if they certainly sell a lot of cars, and they certainly have an international market. So they have access to the US because they sell products in the US. So I think they will be a real competitor, not in the same kind of quality of cars, but probably in volume. I think they'll sell a lot more cars and make, again, a lot lower margins.
Yeah, I mean, that word competitor is a little bit vague, I suppose. But yeah, I agree. They're attacking ICE more. But I mean, like I was saying, people who buy BMWs, they can afford Toyotas as well. And in America, the people identify a lot with a car. For example, when Ford, the Ford Model T, when that mistake Henry Ford made was thinking, oh, we just want lower cost car. That's all the consumers want. We can get the cost down lower and lower and lower. And the cost of the car went down from like $900 to eventually like something like $280 by the time, by the end of it. But in the meantime, General Motors, or maybe it was Chevrolet at the time, they were working out, well, hang on, okay, cars are affordable enough now. Let's see if we can make nicer cars, or keep with, because the Model T was still pretty basically the same design, perhaps with a roof on and a few extra things, but it was basic. And then they're making nicer cars, and people are like, well, hang on, I can actually afford a couple $100 more for a Chevrolet over a Ford. And Henry Ford was obtuse enough to just, even though everyone was telling him like, no, you've got to start making other cars. No, people just want cheaper cars. And eventually he went from his market share of 80% to something like 40%, as there was things like Cadillac and all that. And then he did eventually make, was it the Model D, I think, after that. But then even after that, they realized, hey, Ford alone isn't enough of a brand. We need to, so they started Mercury and started Lincoln, because people wanted to, like, they identify with a car, their brand is important to them. Plus, Americans spend a lot of time in the car as well. And they, you want to have Netflix and things in your car. You want to be able to self-drive. Like the BYD doesn't have self-driving and all this sort of stuff. And I've driven BYD, and it's probably one of the worst cars I've driven in my life. I do kind of mean that. I put my foot down, and after I hit about 40, 50 kilometers an hour, the tires started screeching and losing traction. I then took it driving around the hills.
Sounds great.
And going around the hills. I had the video of it. I put it on my channel, and you can hear the tires screeching as the traction control kicks in after you lose traction. The brakes weren't great. It's not a great car, but it is a low cost car. If people can't afford a Tesla, then they can get this. And it came with, quite a few of the options like radar, cruise control, about a highly optioned Mercedes from 12 years ago. It would have had, it has but it's got, it's good value for the money in a sense. If you just want a car to go from A to B, I think people do want more in a car. And not only that, Tesla offers so much more in a car. Now, I would compare BMW really as a competitor to where Tesla is, more on that luxury standard. And then what you get for the money for maybe a Model 3 compared to a 3 Series, well, obviously the Model 3 is going to be so much faster or quicker anyway, to 100 to 0 to 60. and then all the other elements you get to it, like all the options that come standard, and you start adding those options onto the BMW, and the Model 3 is like, $15,000, $20,000 cheaper. And of course, it doesn't even have self-driving, and it won't update itself. It's not as safe. The safety things are a major element that, it's the safest car in the world. And then you can go into the supercharger network and all the other things. Yeah, BYD, I think they're going to be big in China, and they're making a lot of cars, and the profits, like you're saying, they aren't concerned about the profits so much. They just want expansion. They want market share, and they're going to go overseas as well. But when they start going overseas, you've got shipping costs, you've got tariffs, you've got protectionism against you. Like in the US, they won't have that $7,500 credit. They'll have to pay import duties. They won't have the charging network. BYD have some presence in the US, but I think it's mainly for their hybrid buses. It's not so much for car dealerships where you need all the service centers. People complain about the Tesla service centers. Well, how bad's a BYD one going to be? And then what about BYD? What if Xpeng and NIO and the others want to all come over as well? I mean, there's economies of scale in the service centers and the superchargers, of course. So I think, BYD is a player in the electric car company, in the electric car industry, but they're all using LFP cells. So one major disadvantage of LFP cells is you're limited to a real life range of about 200 miles. And okay, a lot of consumers are okay with that for the cost saving, but a lot of consumers, especially in America, according to research, they want 300 miles. None of them can offer that, and that's in a sedan. You start going to SUV, crossover, pickup truck, minibus, minivan. You've dropped down to 150 miles range, or maybe even less, right? That's not going to be enough. That's it. They can't do long range, and you can say, oh well, they could make nickel batteries, yeah, but they haven't supplied that. You haven't got there. They're harder to produce. And iron-based cathodes are a lot simpler. Okay, that's why they can just make these factories so quickly. But when you start doing nickel, you got it's more. There's all the thermal management issues. It's a lot trickier. The legacy companies, Ford, GM, Stellantis, Mercedes, Volkswagen, what have they invested in? They've all invested in nickel batteries, right? With 200 gigawatt hour factories coming online eventually. It's taking a long time, don't get me wrong. 2024, 2025, 26, Ford like, oh, we have 1 or 2 million EVs a year. Okay, still, that's in the US alone, right? But they also qualify for all those tax credits, and they're offering 300 miles of range, and it's a Ford brand compared to the Chinese brand. And I would say, I haven't driven a Mach-E, but I would say it probably does drive better than a BYD. And
I've seen them in person. They're not bad at all. It's a pretty decent car, but I think from the description you have of BYD, you've driven it and you've experienced it in person. It just seems like Tesla is a class above.